Blinding blizzard. Snowfall amounts are less than forecast, but high winds create havoc in the Northeast. Obama's in Saudi Arabia. The first couple visits a kingdom where religious freedom is non-existent. Not for sale. Congress tackles legislation targeting the selling of human beings. And countering indifference. Pope Francis wants Lent to be a season of caring for one another. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, January 27th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. A dangerous blizzard continues to pound parts of the Northeast tonight. Schools are closed, driving is banned in some cities, and thousands of flights are canceled. Wyatt Goolsby reports from Washington Reagan National Airport on the storm's impact on travel.
Brian, in the last 2 days, we've seen over 7,000 cancellations of flights across the country, and that includes the hundreds here at Reagan National Airport. Now, most of those flights are heading in and out of airports in New York, Boston, and other parts of the Northeast, where many are still dealing with heavy snow and wind. Things are slowly getting back to normal in parts of New York. Earlier today, the state's governor lifted Monday's travel ban, but warned drivers hitting the roads.
While the roads are open, that is not to say that unless you need to be on the roads, you should be on the roads. The roads are still dangerous.
Overnight, New York was hit with pounding snow, but it was mild compared to Boston and other parts of New England. The brunt of the storm brought wind gusts of over 70 miles per hour and dumped more than 2 feet of snow in parts of Massachusetts. Thousands went without power, though it was not as bad as predicted.
The fact that the weather was significantly colder, the snow is a lot fluffier and lighter than anticipated. We may not see quite the same degree of power outages and down lines that we anticipated, which is a good thing.
In total, 7 states declared a state of emergency. As a result, thousands of flights have been canceled or delayed, and hundreds more flights are expected to be canceled tomorrow morning.
They told me that my flight will be moved to Wednesday. I had to stay here at night. This is my bed right here. I slept here last night. Today I think I'll go in the hotel though.
It's the same story for many in Washington.
Overnight, as well as into the early morning hours, we were having to deal with a lot of snow. At Reagan National and Dulles International airports, we had our crews out plowing and treating our runways and roadways so that passengers could get here and our aircraft could get out.
Crews here at Reagan will also be watching once again overnight tonight, looking at those conditions. The weather overall here in Washington hasn't been too bad. Across the nation, though, airport officials expect flights into the Northeast to resume slowly tonight and into tomorrow. Right now, parts of the East Coast are also dealing with flooding, so if you are flying out, it's a good idea to check with your airline with any updates. Brian?
Wyatt Goolsby, thanks. Well, the Northeast blizzard delays jury selection in the trial of the suspected Boston Marathon bomber for a couple of days. Prospective jurors have been told to stay home today and again tomorrow. Johara Tsarnaev faces 30 federal charges in connection with the fatal Boston Marathon bombings in April 2013. 3 people died and more than 260 were wounded. Tsarnaev pleads not guilty to the charges in July of 2013. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. President Obama leads a U.S. delegation to Saudi Arabia to pay respects to the late King Abdullah. He defended the close U.S.-Saudi relationship despite ongoing human rights concerns. Susanne LaFrankie is here tonight with more.
Well, Brian, while Saudi Arabia is a key ally in the Middle East, they have long been criticized for their poor treatment of women, censorship, suppression, and torture of Christians, Jews, and non-Muslims. The White House is treading lightly as it pays respects to a dead king and forges a relationship with a new leader. The U.S. delegation, led by the President and First Lady, was a who's who of powerful leaders from Capitol Hill, a clear indication of the importance of Saudi Arabia as a U.S. ally in a volatile region. Saudi Arabia is a leading violator of human rights. Women can't vote or drive and are treated as property. Freedom of the press and religion are non-existent.
You're not allowed to pray in public. You're not allowed to go to a public service.
Pim Valkenburg, an expert on Christian-Muslim relations, sees some positive changes, including the King Abdullah Center for Interreligious Dialogue. But he says the new king has much work ahead. Mr. Obama defended his administration's close relationship with Saudi Arabia.
Sometimes we have to balance our need to speak to them about human rights issues with immediate concerns that we have in terms of countering terrorism or dealing with regional stability.
Earlier, the president and first lady were greeted in Riyadh by King Salman. Some of the all-male Saudi delegation shook hands with Mrs. Obama. Others simply nodded. The first lady did not wear a headscarf, a strict dress code for Saudi women appearing in public. Last week, protesters demonstrated outside the Royal Embassy of Saudi Arabia in London after the flogging of a blogger. He was convicted of insulting Islam, sentenced to 10 years in prison and 1,000 lashes. Obama said he would not be raising the issue.
There is a place and a time to do things. So if you approach a new king, that's not the first thing that you do. Of course, one of the things that he could say, I would like to come back and discuss some of these things into more detail.
According to the White House, the president met for an hour with King Salman. The two discussed the U.S.-led campaign against the Islamic State and touched on human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia in so-called broad terms. Brian?
All right, thanks, Suzanne. And President Obama also talked of reform as he left India for Saudi Arabia today. He nudged India to respect the dignity of women. He said women should feel more free to walk the streets and ride the bus. Prime Minister Modi took some steps in that direction earlier this year. He inaugurated a campaign against sex-selective abortion and for the education of girls. Michael Kugelman, Senior Program Associate for Southeast Asia at the Wilson Center, is with us. What image do you think the leaders of the U.S. and India gave during this presidential visit?
Well, they were essentially trying to project the idea that they are best friends, which is hard to believe. They had never met until Prime Minister Modi came to the U.S. in September. And you know, this is someone, President Obama, who really is known for being quite aloof. But you know, they were embracing heartily. They were referring to each other on a first name basis. A lot of great warm body language. I think they were just trying to suggest that these are two leaders that like each other. Not only do their countries like each other, but the leaders do as well.
So, in what direction do you see this engagement going from here in the next few months?
I think the trajectory is up. There's a lot of things to be hopeful about. With most U.S. troops having left Afghanistan, it really gives Washington opportunities in the context of South Asia policy to be looking more closely at the relationship with India. Previously, there had been a lot of focus on the war in Afghanistan and on the relationship with Pakistan, but really now, this year, I think things are going to be different.
So the president did make some remarks before leaving India about equality for women and minorities. How do you think his concept of that, the Western concept, is different from that of India's?
Well, I mean, India would say that it's a democracy like the United States and it supports religious freedom and women's rights and things like that, as any democracy would. Of course, India is a country where there are significant cases of religious intolerance, sectarianism, unfortunately. So I think that Obama's speech went over very well on the whole to the Indian population. But at the same time, he was trying to say that even though the relationship with India is very good, the U.S. is aware that India does engage in some types of policies and behaviors that are not necessarily appropriate if you want to think of yourself as a democracy that supports religious, ethnic minorities and that type of thing.
They announced a nuclear pact, too. Is that really a breakthrough or more of an image maker?
Well, I mean, this is a pact that had been ratified 7 years ago, but it hasn't been implemented because of disagreements about liability. So I think that the fact that what we heard now is that this dispute over liability issues has been addressed is a really good thing, and it means that this agreement that's been out there waiting to be implemented for 7 years is finally ready to be implemented. This is a good thing for the relationship overall.
It's interesting to see the way these two countries look at China. I think they have some common ground there on the rise of China, don't they?
Oh, yeah, and reportedly the first thing that Obama and Modi talked about when they sat down to meet was China, and they spoke for 45 minutes only about China. Certainly they both think that China should not be the sole power in Asia, and I think that the U.S. is very happy about India as a rising power and wants to encourage India to engage more deeply throughout the Asia region to serve as a counterbalance to China, and of course this is something that India is already trying to do.
Good analysis of the trip. Mike Kugelman, Senior Program Associate for Southeast Asia at the Wilson Center. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
Japanese officials are holding emergency meetings after the release of a new online video claiming to be from the Islamic State. It warns that a Japanese hostage and Jordanian pilot have less than 24 hours to live. The message posted today, and it shows the hostage holding a photo of the captured pilot. The terrorists demand the release of an Iraqi woman on death row in Jordan for her involvement in a 2005 terror attack. The message warns both men will be killed if the woman is not released. Such a release would effectively strengthen the Islamic State's ties with al-Qaeda in Iraq. Ukraine says intense fighting against pro-Russia separatists has left 9 soldiers dead and 29 wounded in a single day. The violent flare-up shatters a shaky month-long ceasefire in eastern Ukraine. Russia blames the renewed fighting on Ukraine, accusing the country of trying to settle conflict with force. Gunmen stormed a luxury hotel in Libya's capital today, killing at least 4 foreigners and 5 guards. The attack included a car bombing. A hotel staffer says the gunman entered the hotel and fired randomly at staff members in the lobby. The attack underscores the increasing lawlessness in Libya following the 2011 ouster and death of dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Pope Francis calls on the faithful to overcome what he calls the globalization of indifference this coming Lenten season. The Holy Father says we need to pay attention to other people's suffering. We cannot just be concerned with our own problems. The heads of the Pontifical Council and Caritas Internationalis released the Pope's message jointly today. The two groups work closely in the worldwide distribution of papal charity. The head of Caritas explains what Francis is asking the faithful to do.
The call of the Pope is, let us re-establish links, relationships. That is fundamental. The life is based on relationship within the family, within the community, and more globally. And for that, the human person and the poor especially have to be put back at the center of the concerns of everyone and not big money.
Lent begins with Ash Wednesday 3 weeks from tomorrow, February the 18th this year. Some 300 Holocaust survivors are honored guests at ceremonies commemorating the liberation of Auschwitz. Soviet Red Army troops liberated the death camp 70 years ago today. More than 1 million people, mainly Jews, were exterminated by the Nazis at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Today's events were tinged with a sense of anxiety over the growing anti-Semitism and radicalism in Europe and the Middle East. One survivor became emotional, issuing a plea to world leaders to remember the atrocities and the fight for tolerance.
That's the key to my existence. We survivors do not want our past to be our children's future.
Roman Kent and his brother survived imprisonment at several Nazi death camps. They grew up in the U.S. with other children orphaned by the Holocaust. Politics cast a shadow on today's commemoration. Russian President Vladimir Putin was a no-show, the result of the deep chill between the West and Russia over Ukraine. Coming up, Congress tackles human trafficking, the selling of people who are often beaten, raped, and forced to work. And a fascinating look at the technology that revolutionized sports television ahead of Sunday's Super Bowl 49. In commemorating the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, we remember 2 of the saints who died at the Nazi concentration camp. St. Maximilian Kolbe led prisoners in prayer and hymns. He died a martyr, volunteering to die in a prisoner's place. And St. Edith Stein, Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, as she was known, was killed for her Jewish heritage in an Auschwitz gas chamber. Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday evening, January 27th. I'm Brian Patrick. Modern-day slaves are beaten, forced to do grueling work, sold and raped right here in the U.S. The House fights back with a dozen bills. Jason Calvi is here now with that report.
That's right, Brian, and it's an issue that Pope Francis calls an open wound, a crime against humanity, and it's too personal for some.
You are angry. You are hurt. You are upset that no one believed you.
Tina Front survived sex slavery, a sad story repeated across the country. The International Labor Organization estimates there's now more than 20 million modern-day slaves forced into labor or the sex trade. Democrats and Republicans are coming together to fight it.
Everyone needs to be put on notice. If you buy or sell an individual like a commodity, the law is coming after you.
We know that once a girl is sex trafficked, she has a life expectancy of just 7 years, during which she will be raped on average by 6,000 different buyers.
The House passed 2 bills yesterday. One would notify other countries when convicted pedophiles travel there. The House will vote on 10 more human trafficking bills this week. Some would provide help to survivors. Other bills go after online advertisers.
76% of sex trafficking is being done over the internet right now. So if we can prosecute those companies who knowingly put those ads up, boy, that'll shut down the access to these children pretty quickly.
The bills would also help Tina help others. More than 500 victims have escaped thanks to her organization.
I believe that most people thought these were already in place when it wasn't. So learning about what you can do on the local level, these are going to be very important laws.
And late today, the House unanimously passed several more of the bills. It's next the Senate's turn. Representative Noem says she's optimistic the bills will be signed into law before the end of the year. Brian?
Can't be soon enough. Thank you, Jason. House Republicans are likely to vote to authorize legal action against President Obama over his executive order on immigration. A source who was at the meeting says House Speaker John Boehner announced this during a closed-door session with lawmakers today. The litigation would be aimed at blocking Obama's moves, lifting the threat of deportation for millions of illegal immigrants. Scott Walker takes his first concrete step toward a presidential campaign next year. The Republican Wisconsin governor is forming a new political action committee. It will help him travel and raise money as he prepares for a potential White House bid. He's already hired a veteran political advisor and a strategist to oversee his efforts in Iowa. Well, after a small drone crashed in the White House complex Monday, the president is calling for stricter regulation of the unmanned aircraft.
I've actually asked the FAA and a number of agencies to examine how are we managing this new technology, because the drone that landed in the White House you buy in Radio Shack.
The president acknowledged drones can play a useful role in package delivery and crop management, among other things. The man who has acknowledged flying a drone onto the White House grounds works for a U.S. intelligence agency. He told the Secret Service he didn't mean to fly it over the White House. Well, a Nigerian archbishop warns that failure to halt the advance of Boko Haram fighters could bring further catastrophic consequences for innocent Nigerians. The warning from Jos Archbishop Ignatius Kaigama comes as Boko Haram threatens to take the city of Maiduguri. He told Vatican Radio the situation is very dangerous and very disturbing because once they capture Maiduguri, then you can be sure that all of the areas around will easily fall to them. He adds that we are dealing with a group that has lost all rationality and kills people at will. Archbishop Kaigama expressed hope that the international community will somehow help. Well, the line is drawn between the Seahawks and Patriots battling for the NFL championship Sunday in Super Bowl 49. Tonight, we look at another line, one we now count on and may wonder, how do they do that?
On third down.
In football, there is literally a fine line between keeping a drive alive and having to punt.
Just enough for the first down.
A line that's yellow, at least on TV, showing where a player needs to get for a first down.
To be honest with you, I don't remember not seeing the yellow line.
For fans, it's become as much a part of the game as the ball itself.
It's your favorite team, it's 4th and inches. You want to be able to see that your team got the first down.
And when Super Bowl 49 kicks off on Sunday, that yellow line will be there too. A piece of technology that not long ago was revolutionary and has grown into a major and competitive part of televised sports.
Now they have one timeout left.
So that looks pretty good to me.
It works like this. Hours before a game, cameras are hooked up to software that calibrates their movement, zoom, pan, tilt, and other things. And then
we build a virtual field that we lay on top of the real field in our software. And from that software, we operate within our virtual field and we lay our lines over the real field.
The idea goes back to the late 70s, but picked up steam again in the late 90s as computers got more powerful.
The game-winning touchdown.
ESPN's Jed Drake was one of the first to take the idea and run with it.
The reaction was fascinating. It was revolutionary, first of all.
Drake, working with a new company called Sports Vision, debuted the line during a Bengals-Ravens game on September 27, 1998, after struggling a bit over what color it should be.
We looked at red, we looked at blue, we looked at green. Well, green didn't work. You go through the whole spectrum, and sooner or later you realize that yellow is one color that generally is not on the field.
And it looks like another first down.
These days, several companies and broadcasters work the yellow line. And things have expanded to show lines of scrimmage and the field goal range. And the technology has now grown into sports like baseball, NASCAR, and golf.
The yellow line is big money because it's very competitive.
But sports could find there's such a thing as making the TV experience too good.
It could eventually affect attendance, and if that happens, maybe what the NFL has done technologically at home could backfire on them.
And the thought of empty stadiums, a line no sport wants to cross. Up next, it's a painful memory for many, but 70 years after its liberation, we remember the victims of Auschwitz. And Pope Francis reflects on discerning and doing God's will. Auschwitz cries out with the pain of immense suffering and pleads for a future of respect, peace, and encounter among peoples. A tweet from Pope Francis today on this Holocaust Remembrance Day, 70 years after the liberation of the Auschwitz Nazi death camp. Thank you for joining us on this 27th of January, a Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick, and Diane Saltzman is Director of Survivor Affairs at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum here in Washington. Diane, why return to these atrocious memories 70 years after the fact?
The Holocaust teaches us so much about human behavior, and it's critical that we understand how and why these events unfolded, because there's so much relevance in that understanding in our world today.
There are many shocking images. Why do you think it's important, especially for young people, to see these?
I actually am not so sure that it's important for them to see all of the shocking images. It's more important for them to understand the overarching history and what human beings were capable of at this particular time in history.
Do you think they do understand?
I think that many do. I think that we can never stop from teaching them as much as possible, because it really is unbelievable what took place, and so that we have an obligation to continue teaching this history to this generation and future generations.
What a wonderful gift that actual Holocaust survivors share their stories at the museum. But that's only for a limited time, isn't it?
Sadly, it's true. We are losing Holocaust survivors every day here in the United States, around the world. But at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, we give our visitors an opportunity to engage with Holocaust survivors nearly every day. They encounter our visitors when they come to visit the museum. We have speakers go around the country to share their experiences with audiences everywhere.
Tell me what you see, a reaction to that from people visiting the museum that hear someone who was actually there and suffered.
It's overwhelming and incredibly heartfelt. I think nothing greater cements someone's experience in learning about this history than meeting with a Holocaust survivor, with an eyewitness who can talk about what they experienced, what their family experienced, what they remember, what they thought about at the time. And now, all of these years later, going back to those very disturbing, terrible period in their life, but wanting to retell it so that people have a sense of what really took place.
Well, this is personal for me. My great-grandmother probably died at a concentration camp. She was Jewish, and I realized today that Auschwitz was liberated on my mother's 30th birthday. She would have been 100 years old today.
That's extraordinary.
So these memories are very important for all of us, personal for many of us. Do you think that anti-Semitism has been conquered, or is it still lingering?
Sadly, it's a 2,000-year-old plight on humanity that continues. It comes in new forms, in old forms, reemerging. And sadly, we're seeing a reemergence of anti-Semitism in the lands where the Holocaust took place. It means we have to be that much more vigilant about what we see around the world, fight back against it, tell this history, retell this history, and retell this history.
We can never forget, and thank you for what the Holocaust Museum is doing to keep those memories alive. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, he celebrated daily Mass this morning. Pope Francis reflecting on doing God's will in today's homily. He always celebrates the morning Mass at the Vatican's Santa Marta residence where he lives. Francis explained, following God's will isn't easy, but it's the path to holiness for each Christian. The Holy Father offers 3 simple steps to follow God's will. Right from the Ignatian exercises, he says we should first pray for the desire to follow God's will. Then we must pray to know God's will. And finally, pray for the strength to carry out God's will once we recognize it. So prayer is the answer. Until tomorrow, we encourage you to like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter, watch again on YouTube if you like. For our EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Thank you for watching tonight. Good night, and God bless you.